There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cameron Chronicles. I'm your host, Ranjan Jindal, and I'm here with my co-host once again, Caleb Dudley. Caleb, how are you doing this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. We got a big weekend ahead for Duke basketball. Duke is going to be playing North Carolina in this rivalry edition. And in honor of that, we have two very special guests on the podcast, two guests that have not been on either our football or basketball podcast, so super excited. Our first guest is Sophie Levenson. She's the Chronicles feature editor and one of our basketball beats. Sophie, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Of course. Our other guest is Mackenzie Sheehy. She's our Blue Zone editor and another one of our men's basketball beats. Mackenzie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you guys so much. I'm so excited.
Yeah, of course. So Sophie and I covered the Duke-Clemson game last weekend, and Mackenzie was with one of our other beats, Rachel, at Virginia Tech. So we're going to recap those two games and then talk about the rivalry matchup this weekend in Chapel Hill as Duke is going to take on North Carolina. But just to recap the past week of basketball, Duke hosted the Tigers in Cameron Indoor and won 72-71 in a real nail-biter that went down to the wire. So Sophie was actually in charge of gamers. So basically how that works is we publish an article immediately as the buzzer goes off. So that must have been really, wild to write. Could you just talk a little bit about the experience of you having, not knowing how the game was going to go and having to write that?
It was definitely stressful, but I think it's a lot of fun to be in situations like that. It's part of the reason I think journalism's, so much fun. The game was crazy. I really didn't know what was going to happen. To be honest, if we had lost, I would have been kind of screwed. My article was leaning towards Duke pulling out a win, so it would have been a little bit of last minute work if Tyrese Proctor hadn't stepped up at the end with those free throws. I think I kind of I joked that I blacked out. I don't really remember. I also during that game I came down with the flu. I started to feel sick during the actual game. So I thought it was nausea from stress. I think it was kind of a combined situation. Either way, I got through it, and the gamer went up on time.
Yeah, Sophie had her own little flu game like Michael Jordan there. But basically how the game worked is at the end, Clemson was up by 4 with 2 minutes left, and the Tigers turned the ball over 4 consecutive times, and just on the plays that mattered, Duke really made the plays that mattered. And you mentioned Proctor knocked down those 2 free throws; those were really key. I guess Caleb, I'll start with you. Who do you think is the player of that game for Duke as a whole?
Yeah, for me, I think it was definitely Jared McCain. He led a team. He had 21 points, 5 rebounds. But the thing that stood out for me down the stretch, he had 3 steals back-to-back in the last 2 minutes of the game off Ian Shefflin. And, for a freshman to be that mature already and in a big environment like that, Cameron was definitely rocking. He's been spectacular all year, but especially against Clemson, he was great. Yeah,
I think Jared's really improved just as a scorer on all 3 levels of the court, and he's, somebody who can – If Duke needs it, he can score from, the 3 and even drive in, and he showed his strength against Clemson, having some nice little layups in there. And, he's had to grow up fast and grow up in some big-time environments, but this was one of the biggest ones all season, so credit to Jared. Sophie, what about you? Who's your player of the game?
There was definitely a lot of depth on Saturday, but it's got to be Proctor for me. I think he just played with a lot of poise, a lot of confidence, and really you could see him staying calm in those clutch minutes at the end of the game when the game was decided, and that's just so important for a point guard. He's at the helm of the whole team, so I was really impressed with his kind of calmness. And in the locker room afterwards, he just said, "I'm the best free throw shooter in the country," and it was funny, but I mean he has a point. He's a great free throw shooter. And obviously he made them when it really counted.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with both of those. And I'll also give a shout out. I know Kyle Filipowski did not have nearly his best offensive game, probably one of his worst all season up until that last and one that was super crucial. But I'm just going to shout out his defense a little bit because PJ Hall is one of, if not the best, center in the true center, I guess, outside of Filipowski in the ACC. And Kyle Filipowski did not get bullied at all. PJ airballed some shots uncharacteristically. He had a great game because he's a great player nonetheless. But I think Filipowski, he, did a great job for the majority of the game defending PJ and containing him and making his catches difficult. And, when Ryan Young came in spurts, he did that as well. So I think Proctor and McCain earned kind of like the player of the game, but just somebody who didn't let their offensive performance affect their defensive, stamina and output was Filipowski. So credit to him there. So Duke managed to escape that one 72-71, but then had a quick trip over to Blacksburg Monday night to take on the Virginia Tech Hokies on the road, which has always been a tough spot to play for the Blue Devils. But this time Duke got it done, winning by 10, 77-67 in a pretty complete game on the road. So Mackenzie, you were there covering in Blacksburg. Could you talk a little bit about your coverage experience over there?
Yeah, absolutely. It was my first road coverage of the season, so to be in a different environment from Cameron and have a situation where Duke is getting booed rather than cheering and you're seeing a different fan experience is always special, especially when you're a journalist getting to witness those different environments. But I thought it was really a great showing of how Duke can perform on the road, especially when the crowd is not in their favor. And there were times when Virginia Tech was really fighting into the contest and Duke had to find a way around that, especially without the fans on their side. So I thought it was really a great experience to witness Duke playing in an intense road environment.
Nice. Yeah. I guess once again, we'll do our little player of the games. Caleb, start with you.
Yeah, I thought Jeremy Roach was great up in Blacksburg. Obviously, he had the big three at the end of the first half. That was huge momentum going into the locker room. But, coming off the bench, still coming back from that injury he suffered against Louisville, but had 16 points, 4 assists, 4 for 5 from three. He's been great all year. I think he's like top 50 in the country in three-point percentage. He's been great. And I think even come off the bench, didn't know how his role might be in that game, but he was spectacular.
Yeah, I think that backcourt is going to be, when they're all healthy and meshing together, one of the best, if not the best in the country. Mackenzie, what about you?
Yeah, for me, the player of the game and kind of a surprise was Ryan Young. I mean, he is someone that not every game is he going to have his most amazing performance, but when the team needed him to step up, especially with Filipowski in foul trouble, he was really there and he showed out and he performed, especially not only with his 10 points, but with the one key block he made on the other end. And it's always fun to watch him get a dunk or something like that in a game, especially because he doesn't do that very often. So I think in a key moment when the team needed him, he put in the performance that was necessary for Duke to win on the road.
Yeah, that was crazy. A block and a dunk. Ryan Young was showing those hops. Good for him.
It's his second dunk of the season.
Second dunk of the season? Okay, I was wondering if it was his first or second. He was kind of talking with, was it Proctor in the locker room afterwards about?
He's 2-1 on Proctor, but apparently they made a bet.
Okay. Yeah, about who would dunk more. Interesting. All right, that's something to keep an eye on.
I think also this game tested Duke's road ability, but also brought up questions of, has this team played a complete game from start to finish? I think at Virginia Tech, we saw toward the close of the first half, the Hokies were able to fight back into the contest a little bit more. I think at one point, Duke was only up by 3 points. And without that Roach three-pointer at the very end of that first half, I think Duke goes into the locker room with a very different halftime mentality. And so I think the question going forward for this Blue Devil team is, can they play a complete 40 minutes and showcase all of their talent across the entire game?
Yeah, going off what Mackenzie just said there, I think I saw the stat before the game that Virginia Tech had won 5 of the last 6 in Blacksburg against Duke. So it's kind of been a house of horrors of sorts up there for Duke, and for them to be able to have Filipowski get in foul trouble and Ryan Young come in and finish the way he did and the guards play the way they have been playing mostly the whole season, great momentum heading into Saturday.
Yeah, for sure. Unquestionably good road win, good confidence for the team. You mentioned Saturday. We'll talk about that in just 1 second. But now we'll do our little weekly stock up, stock down within the ACC. Caleb, I'll start with you.
Yeah, stock up, I think it's got to be the team that's given UNC their first ACC loss of the season, Georgia Tech. Damon Stoudemire, what a job he's done in his first year. He's got home wins against Duke and UNC now, almost halfway through the ACC season.
And a road win against Clemson, too.
Yes, just spectacular job for them. The record overall doesn't really show it, but when it's time for them to step up against a big team, they come ready to play. And they lost their best player, probably Bayandongo, about 5 minutes into the game against UNC, and went out there and just kept punching and eventually knocked off the Tar Heels. So great job for them, stock up for them. And then stock down, I have to go with Wake Forest. We talked about them a couple weeks ago, or last time, as a team to maybe watch at the top of the conference, but I think they've lost 3 of their last 4 now, just lost at Pitt. lost to UNC the week before, so they're really running out of chances to solidify the resume heading into Selection Sunday. So Stockton, Wake Forest.
Yeah, for me, I'm gonna sound really like hypocritical here because last week I talked about Virginia as a team that wasn't really living up to expectations, but they're undeniably they're on a 5-game winning streak, and the level of competition hasn't been all the way there. It hasn't been great, but I think Virginia's struggles on the road, which they had a little bit earlier in the season, we're gonna see that this weekend when they travel to Clemson to take on the Tigers, but. See if they can move past that a little bit. They beat Georgia Tech and Louisville on the road. You mentioned Georgia Tech, not an easy out in any game, and obviously Louisville struggling a little bit. But they've won 5 straight, including a home win against Virginia Tech. Their offense is starting to come together a little bit. Ryan Dunn, Reese Beekman, and Isaac McNeely are all kind of playing better, playing collectively together. Their defense is never going to be the problem, but they really got some tough tests moving forward with Clemson, Miami, and Florida State on the docket. So we'll see what Virginia's made of, but for now, we can give them a stock up for the past couple of weeks. And then stock down, this isn't one team, but it's just the bottom of the ACC, Louisville and Notre Dame. Louisville's on a 6-game losing streak, and Notre Dame's on a 5-game losing streak. It's just, they're young teams. They're competing. I'm going to give Louisville credit, especially last game. Clemson was up by 20 in the second half, and Louisville cut it down to single digits on Tuesday. So definitely give credit to them, but it's been a rough season over there for Kenny Payne and the squad. So hopefully for the Cardinals, they can keep going. And Notre Dame had a little bit of momentum earlier in ACC play, with that big win over Virginia, but they've been struggling of late. But also a new coach and a lot of young players. So we'll see if the Fighting Irish can bounce back and play better for the rest of the ACC slate. But hopefully they can for just the strength and the depth of the league as a whole. But this weekend is going to be a great weekend of college basketball just across the board. And to cap off, the nightcap is Duke traveling to Chapel Hill to take on the Tar Heels at 6:30 p.m. We have our Duke Chronicle Rivalry Edition coming out on print Friday. So if you're on campus at all, make sure to take a copy of that. And we have all our articles online. And Sophie and Mackenzie here also wrote some great features about the rivalry. Sophie, I'll start with you. Could you talk a little bit about your article that's going to be in the print edition?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and say, obviously, I read everyone's features before they went up, and they were great. And everyone sitting here who wrote a feature, they were awesome. Loved reading them. So looking forward to getting a print copy of those. My feature's about the sophomore class. We have Mark Mitchell, Kyle Filipowski, and Tyrese Proctor, and they've all, they all made the decision to stay at Duke for their sophomore years. And they've all really flourished. I think lots of things have changed. I talk a bit about how Flip has transitioned from, playing forward to playing this center position, which is a big adjustment, especially in the wake of someone like Lively after he went to the NBA. And then Proctor, has been a point guard for Duke since February 4th, Duke's first game against North Carolina last year. But obviously that role has really become a concrete one for him. He's also really young for his class, so this has been a big transition year for him, growth-wise. And then Mitchell, Mackenzie's feature tells you all about Mark Mitchell in beautiful detail. But I just, touched on his role on the team. And Shire's really looked to these guys to step up. Roach has been injured a couple of times this season, and whenever he's been, unable to step up and lead the team, those 3 sophomores have really done a great job. So that's kind of what I focused on. It was fun writing about them. They were the first class that I covered.
Oh yeah.
When all of us sitting here covered. So I think that, players that you write about when you're a freshman will have a special place in your heart. So it was fun writing that.
Oh yeah, that's really nice. That was a great feature, and I think that class is super important to Duke's success, especially in the rivalry, having gone through 1 year of that to mentor some of the freshmen. You gave a little sneak peek of Mackenzie's feature about Mark Mitchell. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I sort of chose to focus in on Mark because I remember watching him last year and the way he sort of splashed onto the scene for Duke and just the glue guy role he played all of last year, and especially when he was out of the game for Duke's second-round NCAA tournament matchup against Tennessee that everyone seems to remember. His absence was definitely noticeable. And I was really curious to look at him coming into this year because while he still is incredibly crucial for this team, his offensive production was nowhere near what people might have been expecting of him, what his last year looked like. And social media and a lot of the Duke fandom took notice and went out and tweeted about his performance. And I was curious to see what that criticism was and also how Mitchell responded. And we really saw him do that in the start to 2024. And even in games where he is not scoring double-digit points or making a splash on the stat sheet, he really is key to this Duke team. And so I really wanted to explore that in more detail and see what he will do for this team going forward.
Yeah, it was a really well done and some cool social media tweets that you said there. People can be ruthless, man. But credit to Mitchell for staying strong and keeping his head steady. Mine, I interviewed David Shoemate, who is the play-by-play voice for Duke basketball and football. He was a phenomenal interview. David's done a great job with so many calls, especially in the rivalry. One that came to note was Wendell Moore's buzzer beater against North Carolina in 2020 in Chapel Hill in February, which was a wild game for a number of reasons. But he had some great insight on his position and how he got to where he is and the importance of a play-by-play role and kind of his outlook on the game, which is super interesting as somebody who's really close to the team and knows a lot about the ins and outs of the game. So definitely check out that and the whole rivalry editions. We put a lot of work into it, and I think it turned out really well. So great job, everyone. As far as the game preview itself, North Carolina is at the top of the ACC, was undefeated in conference play up until Tuesday night when the Tar Heels fell to Georgia Tech on the road. We mentioned it, a little bit earlier. Caleb, you did in your stock up, stock down. But North Carolina is a phenomenal team, ranked number 3 in the country, 17-4 conference record, led by RJ Davis, who's playing as well as almost anyone in the country right now. We all made our picks for that. We'll go to that in a second. But as far as key things to watch, Caleb, what are you looking out for in the contest?
Yeah, the main matchup for me, player-wise, is Mark Mitchell versus Harrison Ingram.
Mm-hmm.
Mackenzie touched on Mark Mitchell. He's the ultimate glue guy for Duke. Obviously not a great shooter by any means, but if he can step out and hit a 3 or 2 like he did against Clemson and make his free throws, that should be enough for Duke, for a team that can really shoot it beyond him. And Harrison Ingram has been a great addition for UNC. Kind of what they tried to get with Pete Nance last year didn't quite pan out. He can really shoot it. He can defend 1 through 4. So I think him and Mitchell will really be a key matchup to watch in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I'm going to be looking at the one stat I'm looking at is Duke's 3-point shooting and just that percentage as a whole, because right now Duke is leading the ACC in 3-point shooting percentage this season, and North Carolina is leading the ACC in opposing 3-point percentage. So, opponents are shooting their lowest clip, out of any ACC team against North Carolina. So they've done a really good job defending the 3. I mentioned last week I went to the North Carolina Clemson game, and Clemson was 1 of 18 from 3. And so it'll be really important for Duke to knock down shots behind the arc. I think Proctor and McCain have been phenomenal. We talked about that earlier. And Filipowski is shooting a lot better. And then you have guys like Jeremy Roach and Caleb Foster, who can also shoot the ball from deep when it matters most. So there's a lot of weapons from 3, but it's a tough environment to play in, and North Carolina does a great job defending the 3. So that's the stat that I'm going to be keeping an eye on through this game. But let's do some picks, guys. That'll be fun. Sophie, do you want to lead us off?
I am an eternal believer in Duke North Carolina matchups just being completely unpredictable. So
Yeah.
I don't even want to do a pick, but I'm going to pick Duke, if only for the reason I think they're the slight underdog in this situation.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned RJ Davis is one of the best players in the country. I looked at it earlier. He's shooting 21.5 points per game. He's shooting incredibly from behind the arc. And then Baycott's going to be really hard to guard as well. And the two of them have so much experience, not only playing in, the NCAA or the ACC, but also against Duke and members of this Duke team. And that's really going to be helpful for them, especially on their home court and in their last years playing basketball probably at all. Especially for Baycott, who said at ACC tip-off that he wants to go into financial management after college.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the backcourt battle is going to be really interesting. You know, Duke has this incredible, you just alluded to it, 4-person powerhouse backcourt. They've said it again and again when the Chronicle has talked to them. They think they have the best backcourt in the country, and they're not alone in thinking that. I do think that Jeremy Roach is going to have a really good game. I think he typically excels against teams like UNC that he's familiar with, that he's played against when he knows the stakes are really high. I thought he played phenomenally against them last year as well. Yeah, I'm really excited. I think it's going to be a big day for the guards. But Mark Mitchell's defensive tenacity is going to be completely invaluable up against Baycott and Ingram as well. So, I mean, it's a chance for everyone to really play their best basketball, and whatever happens, it's going to be so much fun to watch.
Yeah, one of our other beat writers, Dom Finolio, his article is going to be in the print edition. Just did a numbers analysis on it and was like, look, it's no better than a coin flip predicting these games because they're always so wild. But yeah, good analysis there, Mackenzie.
Yeah, I mean, even though I think it's going to be a really close matchup, at least in this first Tobacco Road contest on the year, I think it's going to have to go to North Carolina. And even though they just lost to Georgia Tech on Tuesday, I honestly think that's the worst thing that could happen for the Blue Devils, because now the Tar Heels are going to go into the contest on Saturday really fired up, ready to prove that they belong at the top of the ACC outright. And so I think that level of fire that's going to be in their systems, on top of, like you've mentioned, Davis is playing some of the best basketball of his career, and unfortunately for Duke, that also means he's one of the best players in the country right now. I think he's going to be really hard to stop. Now, that doesn't mean that Duke is not going to put up their best fight. I think especially with Tyrese Proctor playing the way that he has, and Jeremy Roach continuing to build back from injury, and he always seems to come up in big games like this. But I just think that Duke has had a tendency to let teams back into the game a little bit more than they should. And with Filipowski not being his best self lately, I think that Carolina will just have the edge to pull out the victory in this first contest.
Nice, yeah.
I do think the question is who has the bigger chip on their shoulder, and the answer to that question has got to be North Carolina. I think Duke has a little bit of like wanting to prove something after, you know, a less than ideal start to the season, and they're still kind of catching up to expectations that critics are throwing at them. But North Carolina, you know, not making March Madness and then losing to Georgia Tech last week, like Mackenzie, you said, I think that if it's a question of who's more fired up, Carolina's gonna have that advantage.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to put it, because it's so mental with these games. I think the flip side to that is also, like, I feel like North Carolina is under the most pressure, like to prove, especially after losing to Duke, you know, twice last year, they got to prove that, you know, they can compete with Duke and win again. And I mean, they competed last year, great, but just like getting over the hump and defeating the Blue Devils, especially for Baycott and Davis, knowing this is their last year. So yeah, that'll be interesting. Caleb, what's your pick?
Yeah, I think I have Duke. We kind of saw last year in both the games 2 different ways that Duke could beat North Carolina. The first game at home, you saw Derek Lively just absolutely take over down low. He had 8 blocks, 14 rebounds. Jeremy Roach was spectacular. He had 20 points. And Tyrese Proctor was great on R.J. Davis. R.J. Davis was 5 for 16 in that game in Cameron Indoor last year. I think Proctor will draw that assignment again, if I had to guess. And obviously, it's a tough matchup guarding maybe the best guard in the country. But I think, you know, Proctor definitely has the chops for it. We've seen that over his career at Duke. And then in the game in Chapel Hill, we saw Cal Filipowski absolutely take over, 22 points, 13 rebounds. The question for me is, can he do that playing center and guarding Armando Baycott at the same time? Obviously, that Mackenzie said he hasn't been his best in the last couple of games, but his defense has really been there all year. So I think if he can stay out of foul trouble and, you know, just have a solid game like the All-American he can be, I think Duke pulls it out. And
Kyle Filipowski not playing his best is still a basketball player.
Yeah, that's
better
fair.
than almost anyone else in the country.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I didn't realize this when we went through Beats picks, but we're much higher on Duke than the general consensus. The Chronicles Beat picks is going to go out Friday. I guess this podcast is going out Friday too, but and every other beat writer picked North Carolina, so we just happened to bring on the Duke the Duke fans here, but I also picked Duke. 72-69 is, I think, the score that I put on our article. But I just think, Sophie, you mentioned the backcourt. I just put a lot of emphasis on how much a backcourt can control the pace of the game. Duke doesn't play very fast at all, around like 40th or 45th percentile in the country. And I think when you have such a raucous environment in Chapel Hill, which is going to be, you got to have a backcourt that can slow the game down. I mean, North Carolina wants to play fast, and so does Duke sometimes. But I think Duke is also really good at balancing transition opportunities and then just like slowing down, going through the sets on offense and letting, Proctor and McCain and Roach really run that offense well. And I think Proctor is going to be the difference, man. I think his ability to just create shots at will, and whenever Duke needs a bucket, like Coach Shire can point to Proctor and say, "You go score," and he will. Has a nice little step back, and he has some nasty moves. So I think Proctor really coming into his own as a player these past few weeks after returning from injury has been really a step up for Duke. And I think Caleb, you mentioned his ability to guard Davis is going to be extremely important because RJ's playing, as well as anyone. And I think Proctor guarding Davis will make it harder and put a lot more pressure on the likes of Elliot Cadeau and Cormac Ryan to produce. And they're new to the rivalry, so we don't really know how they're going to perform. Same thing with McCain on Duke's side. But I'm going to give a slight edge to Duke by 2 or 3 points, but it's really, like I said earlier, a coin flip. I wouldn't be surprised to see any outcome. But nonetheless, it's a great environment. It's a top 10 matchup for the rivalry. What more could you want as a Duke or North Carolina fan or spectator? So definitely fun for everyone in college basketball across the country. But it's shaping up to be a good one.
Yeah, I think you just said top 10 matchup. I know we have one of our writers, Jonathan Levenson, is coming out with a column tomorrow for the rivalry edition about how the first time in a while that game has been that high stakes in the regular season. I think it's the first time they're both in the top 10 since Zion and this year Little Oregon School going at it in the ACC championship. So for that to be, a game finally again where they're both in the top 10, college game day will be rocking on Saturday morning in Chapel Hill. And it'll really have impacts on the ACC race. If Duke wins, they're in the driver's seat to win the ACC. So I think, for the Blue Devils and both the Tar Heels alike, it'll be a great game on Saturday.
I've got a hometown interest in this game. Paxton Wojcik on the Tar Heels is from Charleston. I knew his younger brother who plays at Harvard with Flip's brother.
Interesting connection. Small world. But yeah, Paxton's come off the bench a couple times and made some key shots. So we'll see. I think the bench is also, I'm glad you mentioned him because the bench matchup is going to be super important, especially like you said, if Filipowski gets into foul trouble. Will we see Ryan Young, like Mackenzie said earlier against Virginia Tech, step up? Or will Sean Stewart / TJ Power, maybe one of them, get a couple minutes and impress? So many questions, but we love basketball.
No way to know.
Yeah, only one way to know. Saturday at 6:30. So everyone be sure to check out our rivalry edition. It's on shelves. It's online at dukechronicle.com.
But our cover on the rivalry edition is really cool. We sourced members of the Duke community. We asked them, what does Duke basketball mean to you? And they
in one word, yeah.
In one word. And they responded on Twitter and on Instagram, and we sourced the cover of our rivalry print from that.
Yeah, and we also, I forgot to mention, collaborated with North Carolina student paper, the Daily Tar Heel, in this rivalry edition, and together we do a fundraising challenge for student journalism, and it's still going on, so we have about 1 day left, so if
Donate! Independent student journalism, we need you.
Yeah, exactly. So any amount definitely certainly helps. On the Duke Chronicle website and the Daily Tar Heel website, there are links to fundraising, and we do like a little challenge to see who can donate more, and we're definitely on Team Chronicle here. So
the Chronicle is currently behind by a couple thou.
Yeah, when we're recording this, which is Thursday night, the Chronicle is behind by a couple thousand. So
we don't we don't need to lose. We didn't lose this weekend.
Yeah, Ranjan forgot to mention we, in collaboration with the Daily Tar Heel, play a basketball game every year. Last year we lost and went in their print edition. Kind of a chip on our shoulder this year, playing at home this year at our gym on East Campus. We came out with the win, 2 games. Best out of 3, we won both the first 2 and won. We had some adversity. Our center, Don Fanoia, went out with an injury in the second game, bleeding like crazy through his head. But, at the end, we pulled it out. Ranjan was spectacular as our point guard, as always. We made it work. DTH was a great time. It's always a fun time playing against them. And, now we're 2-0 on the season against them, football and basketball. So hopefully it'll, help the fundraising as a whole. And Indie Week came out and wrote a great story about the game, about the future of student journalism. So it was great all around.
Yeah, I cramped last year. Got a little bit. I was the turn that got injured, so definitely a chip on my shoulder. But yeah.
Ranjan, what did it feel like to come back after facing such tough adversity in this important athletic event?
Yeah, it's the biggest day of the year, so it felt great to come out and perform, and it was a fun game. And the Daily Tar Heel does great journalism as well, and so we enjoy doing this with them, and it's always fun to have some little friendly rivalry there. So it was satisfying to go out with a W.
Ranjan's got a great shot from behind the arc.
Sometimes. I appreciate that. But yeah, sorry. We've been talking a lot, but definitely just got a lot of content out, and this is an important week for both of our papers as a whole. So appreciate anything you guys can give, but thanks again for listening to this podcast. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Mackenzie, for your first time. I'm sure one of many more times on this podcast. We've enjoyed having you on, and Caleb, thank you to you once again. Great job.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. Everyone, make sure to tune in Saturday at 6:30. For Caleb Dudley, I'm Ranjan Jindal. This has been the Cameron Chronicles.